Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Things Considered. Today I would like to speak to you about an article that I came across, and it talks about the Seattle Department of Transportation. And it says here that citing security incidences, SDOT considers adding fare enforcement officers on streetcars. Now, I'm going to read you this, and as I'm reading it, I'm going to also explain to you how Seattle used to be much better than it is now. For those of you that are transplants that have just moved to Seattle, and for those of you who have only been in Seattle for a short time, and when I say short time, I'm going to say like within the last 15 to 20 years, you don't know that Seattle used to be much better, and I'll explain why. Back when I lived in Seattle, they had buses in downtown, and they had a free zone in downtown from 6 in the morning to 9 at night. So I'll get to that in a minute. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. It says the Seattle Department of Transportation, SDOT, is considering adding fare enforcement officers to streetcars, citing security concerns on its First Hill line. The move comes as other regional transit agencies consider ways to reduce the harms of fare enforcement on people with low income and people of color who may also make up some of the ridership on the First Hill line. Well, First Hill has always been poor. In Seattle, that's been the poorest neighborhood of all of the neighborhoods in Seattle. As you go from First Hill, you're looking at the map, the United States map, and you see Seattle. You're looking at First Hill going across to Queen Anne. First Hill has always been the least expensive. It's always been the poorest neighborhood because that's where the county hospital is at. Harborview is over there. You go from First Hill over to Queen Anne. Queen Anne's the most expensive, or at least it used to be. It's not anymore because the wealth is spreading out, but the extremely rich, the Bill Gates of the world, would probably live in Queen Anne. That's where all the old, stuffy, expensive money is at. It says here, King County Metro changed its fare enforcement processes after a 2018 audit, included that the system particularly hurt people experiencing homelessness. A survey found that 43% of the people who didn't pay their bus fare reported a household income of less than $1,000 a month. You can't live on $1,000 a month, not in Seattle. People are going to say, oh, well, why don't you just move to a cheaper place? You can't. Once you're there, you're stuck. It says here they're making $1,000 a month, and nearly a quarter reported no income at all. Sound Transit is considering a similar change. Now, the thing is that if you try to help the people that are poor, you try to help the people that are making $1,000 or less or don't have any money, there's going to be people that have money that are going to complain. Well, why don't we get special treatment? Why do we have to pay for bus fare? And why do they get to wait for it for free? Well, you are blessed with the ability to make more than $1,000 a month. That's for sure. There's some people that have mental disabilities, handicaps. Some people get into situations that they can't get out of. Their fault, no fault, it doesn't matter. They're in a situation now, and they can't afford to pay the bus fare. You got to get to the hospital, or you got to get across town to go visit a family or something. And then it's like you hop on the light rail or you hop on the bus, and you've got no money to get there because you don't have no money, and you can't go now because you got to pay the fare, so you're stuck. It says here, SDOT outlined its proposal in a memo sent to Mayor Jenny Durkin and obtained by the Seattle Times through a public records request. This is an immediate needs to address the increase in security incidents on the streetcar, wrote the authors. SDOT Streetcar and Transit Corridors Manager Chris Elderman and Streetcar Operations Manager Curtis Ailes, A-I-L-E-S, Ailes. But the July 22nd memo also acknowledged many potential equity issues given the diversity of the neighborhoods and populations served by the First Hill line. The line runs from Capitol Hill through First Hill, the Central District, and the Chinatown International Districts to Pioneer Square. Under SDOT's proposal, the officers would likely not use tickets for a failure to pay at first, instead surveying riders and collecting data on current ride fare payment activities, the memo says. The plan would cost about $125,000 a year. A small number of fares checked on the First Hill line in 2018, about 1 in 5 was not paid according to figures provided by SDOT. Spokesman for the mayor and SDOT emphasized that the discussion was in the early stages. SDOT did not answer questions about the proposal. Asked about streetcar fare enforcement during a separate recent interview, SDOT Director Sam Zimbabwe said, "All options are on the table." Now, I understand that it takes money to keep things working. It does. It takes money to keep the streetcars going. But also, there's going to be people that just cannot pay the fare, and they have to get somewhere. And the bus is becoming a necessity. It's no longer a luxury anymore. Taking the bus is not a luxury. Now, when I lived in Seattle, I made sure that I stayed in places where it was easiest to get to by walking. Not because I couldn't afford the fare on the bus, it's that I preferred to walk. I was more healthy back then, and I loved it when I lived in Seattle. It says here, Seattle has largely avoided fare enforcement on its 2 streetcar lines, which together carried about 1.7 million riders last year. Metro operates the streetcars under a contract with the city. Unlike some Metro buses and Sound Transit light rail trains, streetcar riders don't encounter fare enforcement officers who can cite them if they fail to pay. Unlike some Metro buses and Sound Transit light rail trains, streetcars. Okay, security staff also do not ride and monitor the streetcar, the memo says. Metro staff check some fares but don't issue citations. Now, I'm going to say this. I think the streetcar should be considered like the downtown zone used to be. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here. It says here, and I'll explain in a second, so if I'm confusing you, please bear with me. The SDOT consulted Metro late last year about using the bus's agency's fare enforcement officers on the streetcar. Metro offered 2 officers for 4 hours a day, 7 days a week. The officers work for the private company Securitas, which operates with both Metro and Sound Transit. Reports of security issues like harassment and threats to operators have maintained roughly consistent on the South Lake Union line, but increased by about 50% on the First Hill line last year. SDOT and Metro says ridership has also increased about 31.5% on the First Hill line. The total number of reported security incidences on the First Hill last year about 36. Is about what 2 of Metro's busiest rapid ride lines, the A and the E lines, see in 1 month. This is okay, good. The total number of reported securities across about four years of security incidences on the streetcar documented by Metro. The most common issues was unruly or disturbing behavior. with 20 reports. The second most common was threats to drivers with 12 instances. In the same time frame, there were fewer than 10 of each other types of incidences, including 7 reports of verbal abuse, 6 reports of threats against passengers, and 7 reports of people sleeping on a streetcar, according to Metro data. Metro spokeswoman Tori Reining said in an email, there are regular quality of life incidences similar to what one might expect or experience on traditional bus services, what aren't reflected in the numbers. She cited people who are intoxicated or experiencing mental health episodes as examples. Meanwhile, the First Hill Line, their fare revenues have not kept up with the ridership increases. The agency does not currently have data to contribute to lower fare revenues to evasion. The agency does not currently have data to attribute the lower fare revenues to evasion, Metro said. Some of the discrepancies could be due to other factors like transfers from other modes that cost more. Of fares checked, 20.5% were unpaid on the First Hill Line in 2018, and 8.5% were unpaid in South Lake Union, according to figures reported by SDOT. In a recent report to the City Council, SDOT listed 8% as its projected fare evasion rate for the coming years. Advocates for reforming fare enforcement warned against expanding enforcement, but said they supported SDOT's plan to gather more information about why streetcar passengers may not be paying. The Metro audit and survey suggests the number one reason people don't pay their fare is they don't have the resources to do it, said Allison Eisinger. Allison Eisinger. I pronounced her name wrong. Sorry about that. Director of the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness. Let's not confuse security issues with fare enforcement issues, because that is exactly the path that leads to punishing people for being poor. The memo recommends more equity analysis and fare enforcement is implemented on the streetcar. Now, I'm going to say this. When I lived in Seattle back in the 90s, I'm going to make this very brief because this was extremely long and it was probably boring, and for all of you that stuck with me, I appreciate that. I really do. I try to do what I think is best in a good video, and I try to give you the best kind of news that may help you the best I can. If I'm boring, please thank you for bearing with me. Let me know that I'm boring. Give me an idea how to fix the problem. Now, back when I lived in Seattle, back in the 90s, they had the downtown zone. They had buses that ran all over downtown in the downtown zone. They were all electric, and they were all free from 6 in the morning to 9 at night. And a lot of the homeless people and the drunks and the bums that had to get from one edge of town to the other, one edge of downtown to the other, where the homeless shelters were at, could just hop on. They didn't have to pay no fare. The bus drivers didn't have to give them any grief. They didn't have to give any grief to the bus drivers. They just get on and they go into Pioneer Square, and they just ride the bus. They go down to where the shelters are at, and then they go to sleep, get up in the morning, and start their day all over again. It also helped business people that were in downtown Seattle hop on to a free bus, go to lunch, hop back on, and go back to work. It kept a lot of the heavy traffic off the streets, and they had bus tunnels underground that were all electric as well. So during the day, buses could go underground and sneak around and go from Pioneer Square all the way up to the Westlake Shopping Center, all the way out toward the Space Needle and various other places. Those are buses that would go underground, and then they would come above ground when they were outside of the downtown area. Whoa, that was a lot. Now, that was back in the 90s. About the late 90s, early 2000s, they started, Seattle started to not get their funding to help do that anymore, so they had to figure out a better way to do it. And they didn't come up with a better way to do it, they just came up with a different way. Now they've got the streetcar, they've got the light rail, they've got the bus systems, and they've got the monorail. Now the monorail was never free, you had to pay to ride that. And I understand that's a specialty thing. Monorail was not a necessity. You got other things like buses and all that. So to take the monorail, you wouldn't have to worry about that. You would just hop on, pay your fare, and you'd go. Now, there was a lot of people that would get on the buses that didn't have their fare, and they would give some excuse. The bus driver would have to worry about that. But now, buses have become a necessity. Buses are no longer a luxury. Buses are a necessity. And for especially people that are on disability, people that are making under $1,000 a month. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, how can a person live on $1,000 a month or under $1,000 a month? Well, I'll tell you, it's not easy. Anyway, if you have any ideas, man, my eye is itching. If you have any ideas of what can be done to fix this problem and make the buses more accessible to the Seattleites, please let me know. If you like my videos, please put a like and subscribe down at the bottom. If you think I can do a better job, put a comment. Let me know what I can do to make this better. If you think I'm long-winded and my videos are too long, please put a comment and tell me. If you have an idea for a video, tell me. I'd love to work on it. This is an us communications, a you and I. We can't do this all by ourselves, but as a group, we can get things done. This has been All Things Considered. Have a good day, Seattle, and all points beyond.